All right, today we are talking about how stress affects our bodies and our minds and how to test for it. And if you stay to the end, I'll give you the Homer Simpson version of quick stress relief. So, without further ado, today we're going to talk about how stress and or anxiety affects our bodies. So, what happens in the short term with anxiety, for example, specifically when there's something in the future that you are anticipating that you receive from the outside world or from the inside world, that there's something you need to focus on, preferably something that might cause pain or even death at the extreme. What happens is your body and your mind has a deep reflex, similar to when you tap on your knee, boom, and you get a little reflex there. What happens is that internal or external perception of something that we need to focus on puts us on high alert, which is an appropriate adaptation to be able to recognize back in the olden days, for example, if there was a lion coming. Now, anxiety is, generally speaking, coming from the perspective of the future, right? So what is this thing that I need to focus on? So in a short-term perspective, and or the old school version of our programming, that we needed to pay attention to what was happening because something might kill us or maim us or cause some sort of pain, in our modern society, what happens is we get all sorts of signals that are triggering us in this place that puts us on high alert all the time. Now, where did that come from? Generally speaking, there's going to be something that happened in the childhood, usually between the ages of 0 and 8, that caused a lot of the programming to be set to the point where you have a really, really high set point as to how diligent that you needed to be in relationship to your environment. Sometimes that can come from, I'm a parent, so I can say this out loud. Sometimes we as parents don't give our children what they need in the sense of like holding space for them, or we ask them to do something that's probably not age appropriate, or we don't see what their needs are because we're stuck in our own needs. And so what happens is that child then gets the programming that either, A, B, and C must not be true about me, and I have to be on high alert to pay attention to my parents' needs, for example. Now, the problem with that is as we age, if that child doesn't have the opportunity to sit and be able to have space held for them and kind of clear that programming out and let go of it, what happens is over time, they end up developing this really, really high set point. So it would be the equivalent of, let's say, for example, you jumped into your car and one of your kiddos set the car automatically to 90 degrees, right? And let's say you don't want it at 90 degrees, and so you open up the windows to try and cool it down, except for the car stays on the auto 90 degrees. So then when you roll the windows back up, the car is cranking right back up to 90 degrees and you're hot and you're sweating. If you can't ever realize that your auto is set to that 90 degree point, well, then it's never going to change. And so what happens is as when we're small children, we get that set point really, really high. And then as we grow into adults, we're kind of always on edge, or maybe some sort of traumatic experience happened to us. There's a lot of different reasons why that might be, and different people's constitutions kind of precondition us to a situation where if you take 5 people, maybe 2 or 3 of them might have some sort of trauma response to a certain situation. Let's say, for example, a car accident. 3 of them don't. They kind of move on with their lives, but 2 of them do. This is neither good nor bad, but this is kind of the precursors that set you up for this anxious place that then burns your systems out over time, because what happens is just like when you have your car set to 90 degrees and you want to cool it down, when you close your window back up again, that thing is still cranking. And when you're doing that, it's like you're doing that all the time, and the car doesn't get a break. Or let's say, for example, another one that I use is, let's say, for example, you're driving an old shift stick in first gear around town, redlining it all over the place. What happens is you're supposed to shift into gears so you're not pushing the engine as hard as possible. Well, what happens is over time, because your programming was such that you were in this place where you couldn't shift up or you couldn't take off the gas pedal, you always needed to be in this high rev place. what happens is your motor starts to break down, the car starts to break down, different things start to break down. Now there are a lot of different tests that we use in the office to determine whether or not, or where you're at in the stage of breakdown. So one of the things that I use on a regular basis is something called an adrenal stress index. Now, the adrenal glands are a little pyramid shape that sit on top of the kidneys. Okay, you got 2 of them. And they're responsible for your stress response. So let's say, for example, if you're sitting and you go to a standing position, the adrenal glands are the things that push the blood up to your brain to get you moving. So if that's not working very well, then that's a problem. So what happens is over time, that system starts to break down. So we use the adrenal stress index, which is going to be representative of and give us kind of a picture, a snapshot, if you will, in time as to where your body's ability to handle stress is at, based on your cortisol, which cortisol is a stress hormone that rises in the morning, that's supposed to get you up and out of bed. And then you have a little bump again right at lunchtime, and then it's supposed to be at its lowest at the end of the day. Now, this test is really easy, simple. That's one of the reasons why I like it. You can kind of check and see how stressed you are from the anxiety piece over time, how high your red line has been revving. And so you just spit into these little containers 4 times during the day. You send out some filled in information, and what you get is you get this really cool test review. Now, you can actually see here, this is a mock-up of one of the tests that we do. You can see that there's a cortisol curve here. Generally speaking, it's supposed to be highest by roughly 8 a.m. if you're on a normal natural cycle, and it drops about noon. You get a little pump right there, roughly noon, until about 4 o'clock, and it's supposed to be at its lowest is at about midnight. And that's the normal natural cycle of this process. And so what happens is, again, if you have all normal levels, that's what it looks like. Now, if these levels are not normal, what you'll see is on the review, the curve will be down here low, and it will give us an idea as to how long you've been redlining, how bad the redlining is, and how bad your car is beat up, if you will. Now, if you look here, this is a nice, cool little test, because this also gives us information about what's happening with your stress hormones. This is a hormone called DHEA, and this is a precursor to that cortisol that I was talking about earlier. Cortisol, like I said, is a stress hormone that's supposed to get you up and rocking and rolling. But if you're in a stress response all the time, that tends to be burnt out a little bit and out of balance. So you can see here the little green area is where you're supposed to be, and you can be out of balance with the DHEA, which is that precursor. It's like the fuel of a fire. Have I burnt it all up? Is there not much available for me? Which stage I'm in, right? So an acute stress response has a high cortisol response and a high DHEA, for example. The cortisol is elevated, and then over time what happens is you stay in a high cortisol level and your DHEA starts to lower. So these are really important pieces of information that we gather here. And then eventually you burn all your DHEA out and your cortisol is depressed. That's the worst. Okay, so you have low cortisol and low DHEA. That's an adrenal gland that's not working very well. Now, this also tests for insulin levels. Insulin is a really, really important piece of information in reference to how your blood sugar is functioning, as well as your chronic stress responses. Those things will be elevated, and that will also help determine how easy it's going to be to get you healed up from this long-term stress response. Now, you can see there's another thing that we look for too. It's called a 17-OH progesterone, and we call that the pregnenolone steal. So what happens is all your other precursor hormones that makes you gets stolen from the pregnenolone or the cortisol because your body says, hey, that's what's most important. We're still in this acute state. We need to give the cortisol everything we have. And so we can see how much that level is, or what the level and height of that level is, to know how bad it really is. How bad is your motor? Also, what happens is over time, your digestive system does not need any resources. And so all of the energy in the gut continues to be depleted. And then we can see that by a salivary IgA. It gives us reference to the mucosal membranes of the digestive system as to whether or not they're functioning very well. Also, some people over time, because of this weakness in these barriers, these boundaries, if you will, tend to also see problems with things like wheat. You've probably heard of gluten-free, for example. We also check and see if there's any gluten or gliadin antibodies found in the gut or from the saliva testing to know whether or not the gut is responding to these things. Now, again, this is the way we want this cortisol curve to look. We want it to have a nice pump in the morning, a little pump at lunchtime, and then at lowest at bedtime. So anxiety puts you into a state where you're constantly burning all of your resources, constantly focused on that thing that's supposed to be your main focus. Your mind gets kind of overloaded, and what happens, you burn all your resources out. When you burn all your resources out, that means you've got body systems that are also burnt out. So if you want to check and see where your anxiety has gotten your adrenals and what stage those are at, this is an absolutely beautiful test for that. So there will be a link down below for additional information in reference to this. And so for those of you who stayed till this very end, I do appreciate you. Please like and subscribe. If you like this content, please follow us, and we will be bringing great content additionally to you. So Homer Simpson, for those of you who maybe have seen Homer Simpson, my wife may not necessarily like that, but he did something on a regular basis. He's just kind of a middle-aged guy kind of going through life, and regularly he would do something, he would like, oh, and he would say, don't, and he would put his hand on his forehead, you know, really like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And so there's actually a lot of benefit from this. This is a very, very simple process. On your forehead, right about here, there are 2 acupuncture points that a lot of energy lines flow through right here. And so naturally, you'll even see statues or people who are like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And so what I want you to do is recognize that you can formally do this. When you're in a stress response, when you're in a difficult situation, when you feel your body ramping up, when that anxiety has gotten you, it's very simple to put your hand on your forehead. You can practice right now. You put your hand on your forehead, and you can take a couple of deep breaths. You can close your eyes if you need to. Some people in an acute anxious state are not going to be able to do that. So you can focus on a point in the wall, kind of relax your eyes a little bit. Take a couple of deep belly breaths, and this point on your forehead will help you relax. So I hope you found that helpful. This is Dr. Fisher signing out.